Welcome back. In this session we'll talk about inquiring with technology. And we're going to think about inquiry-based learning and what that means. So for example, do you learn best by being told something or by figuring it out for yourself? By asking questions maybe? Do you remember the answer to questions that you asked? Well, an inquiry is learning kind of with a purpose to answer a question or to figure something out. And when you're learning with a purpose, your brain deals with information differently. When there's a purpose for it, your brain automatically attempts to make meaning out of every new thing it encounters. If your brain doesn't think it's important, it's ignored. So if someone is bored, they don't learn. If they're engaged, mentally engaged, their brain is continually trying to figure out, where does this fit, where does that fit? So it helps you understand what you discover by your brain making its own meaning. In a situation like that, though, are there right or wrong answers? And how do you test and grade for something like that? So traditionally, the teacher's job was to provide knowledge. But now, knowledge is everywhere. You have an internet connection, you have the world's knowledge at your fingertips. So the teacher's role can change to helping someone learn how to learn, to how to make sense out of the information that they obtain. There are a number of names for inquiry-based learning that are essentially the same. So we call it inquiry-based learning, but there is something called problem-based learning. If you first give students a problem and say, how can we solve that? And then they have to investigate to figure it out. Or if you expect a project at the end, maybe students build a website, they write a play and perform it, they do a community service activity, maybe they do a science experiment. But PBL is the abbreviation usually for project-based learning, sometimes for problem-based learning. If this is if the inquiry is based on following up a student's existing interest, they're already fired up about it, then we can call it interest-based learning, and sometimes you'll see it also called challenge-based learning. Well, is there any evidence that this works? Well, let me show you the first evidence that I saw. In 2004, I visited Henrico County Schools, which is the Richmond, Virginia area. 2 years before, they had started a one-to-one laptop project, 36,000 laptops for every 6th to 12th grader. After the first year, they really wanted to know, did this make any difference in what students learned in math and ELA, that's English Language Arts, Science and Social Studies. So they compared this year's scores to last, and no change, 0% difference. In English Language Arts, nope. In Science, 0%. In Social Studies, they figured, that can't be because people are just bored in Social Studies. Boy, were they surprised. There was a 10% increase across the district in Social Studies achievement scores. They wondered, how can this happen? Nobody cares about Social Studies. Well, it turns out that maybe because Social Studies is typically boring, students were able to research topics that they were studying. If the teacher was teaching about a revolution, American Revolution, French Revolution, he could have had them research, so are there any places in the world now undergoing a revolution? How can you connect those causes to the causes that are listed in your book for the revolution we're studying? So that was one way that student inquiry using their technology gave an immediate 10% boost to standardized test scores. Another case is in Singapore. Singapore has a national school system run by its Ministry of Education. And about 8 years ago, they introduced a 3-year plan requiring more inquiry-based, more student-driven learning. So there were many studies done, and some of them had this outcome. So they had a group that was taught normally, no change. The change was in group 2, who learned on their own through an inquiry-based learning system. Then they tested a full year later, 12 months later, to see what did students still remember, because that's learning, the remembering that continues, right? So the taught group remembered next to nothing, but the inquiry group remembered almost everything that was taught a year before. So this sort of evidence convinces even skeptics that, it's hard to assess this, but there's something important going on. So there's been a fair amount of literature published. In this case, a book was written titled "Learn More, Study Less." Now that seems like it's an opposite, doesn't it? But let's see what the book proposes. So when you do an inquiry approach, your learning strategies are different. So you're looking for big ideas, and you're looking for how those ideas connect. What comes first that causes another that might cause something else. Then you learn different techniques. For example, obviously you acquire ideas in your research, but then next you link the ideas. That's what you'll be doing in your book synthesis. Then in the real world, when students are investigating, there's odd stuff that shows up, not just a carefully scripted lesson. So it might be random, it might be contradictory. So the student has to figure out how to incorporate these arbitrary elements. Their learning becomes more sophisticated. If there are interests they enjoy, the ideas can be extended. And it goes beyond school learning, where students learn how to be better learners, but even more than that, they learn how to teach themselves, how to educate themselves through life. So Singapore called its plan "Teach Less, Learn More." That was actually the official name of the 3-year government education plan, TLLM, Teach Less, Learn More. Imagine if the U.S. Department of Education's plan was Teach Less, Learn More. But there is continual evidence for this. In the graph, the U.S. is in orange, Finland, great school system, is in blue, and the average of developed nations is in green. So just for high school, notice that the time that Finnish students spend in front of their students is only half the amount of time that U.S. teachers spend in front of their students. But the Finnish students learned twice as much. How is that possible? It's not that we have bad teachers and theirs are perfect. It's that during this other time, the students are learning rather than being talked at by their teacher or being guided in small activities. Even in primary school, if we think that 50% more time that Finnish primary school teachers spend in front of their students are American teachers spend. So even this amount for young kids is spent in something like inquiry-based learning rather than didactic, teacher-organized activities. So it's not a battle between teaching and learning, but as we think about the teaching process versus the learning process, learning has to have more weight. And in fact, that's the main positive message of the No Child Left Behind Act for the U.S. It said that we don't care how many hours you teach, what we care is what students learn. Now this is an international concern, So here in English and Chinese, the learn more, study less. Every developed country is concerned about not just learning by listening to the teacher, but better ways that students have of meaningful learning. So even in Thailand, you can see, well, maybe you can't, although there are things you can read like team learning. But let's translate one of those pages from Thailand, and even there, not one of the developed countries, their first element is teach less, learn more. Student-directed learning, collaborative, team, learning by doing, project-based learning, beyond standards, evaluating the team, not secret grading, but sharing and helping each other learn. This is a dramatic change in the way many teachers and many people see teaching. It's not a new idea. William Butler Yeats said a long time ago that education is not the filling of a pail with content, with knowledge, but rather the lighting of a fire, igniting a passion within the person. And that flame will continue to burn throughout school, throughout their lives. They will continue to learn even after they've left their teachers behind. So what are the technology tools that are used? They're the technology tools you use for lots of things. So a web browser for research, photographs for taking evidence of things in your neighborhood and analyzing the photographs, voice or video recordings, for example, of interviews, sensor systems in science, anything that you can record from your smartphone, geospatial coordinates, GIS systems for inquiry into like natural resources, cultural distribution through Google Earth, and all of our internet collaboration tools for students helping to make knowledge together in their inquiries. Well, where can you go to see examples of this, videos of students doing this, descriptions of actual classrooms? Okay, here we are on a web browser, and let's zoom in a bit to our, to where we want to go. So it's edutopia.org. And when we get to that site, there are a number of advanced topics that you can browse. For example, brain-based learning, Common Core, game-based learning. They have a great selection of videos, 5 keys to project-based learning, game-based learning, flipped learning. But we can search for inquiry. And when you do that, you'll get a listing of both videos and other, there we go, videos and other materials. So inquiry-based learning, you can learn more by going to any of these links. Or here's inquiry-based projects for the classroom, that's a blog. Guide to a school district's program of inquiry, a video, inquiry-based learning in the science classroom, and it's just a magnificent, magnificent resource. Okay, so with this as introduction, you're ready to go for some of your own inquiries. Until next time, bye for now.